Councillor Gregor Smythe will be joining remotely, and Councillor Rathbone.
They're all remotely, yeah. Okay, item 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? I'm not hearing any, so item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Any corrections? If not, can we just go through matters the actions arising, which first one was at 4.2, where Councillor Smythe stressed the issue of the climate emergency and the need for a financial framework around it, a point I very much agree with. So ask Ian to just say where we've got to on that.
Everyone hear me okay in here? Great stuff. And on the screen as well, just checking, sometimes it doesn't always pick up. So I'm not hearing anyone interject to say that they can't, so that's great. Yeah, so in terms of the climate emergency, Chair, certainly you'll see if you're at the presentation that we gave to Scrutiny Panel, where we gave detailed overview of how the Council is going about structuring its approach to that. We have taken away the action from scrutiny, which builds upon the point there around not just financial planning we've been doing, but also the need to make sure we've got member oversight governance in place. And the reference from that meeting was to take away an action from myself, Chief Executive, to discuss how audit and scrutiny can have a greater role in that, and we'll be coming back to proposals on that shortly.
Great. I mean, can I say, I think Audit Committee has got a key role in both ensuring that there are targets set in this field, and the risks, particularly around the need for coordination of the different departments to hit those targets, presents a management organisational risk as well as a set of external risks. So I think dealing with this as a generic issue from an audit point of view, particularly given the long-term financial commitments necessary, means that we need to address this with officers and come up with an appropriate framework which we can then audit a sort of risk performance matrix in this, but clearly that's going to take some time. Any questions on that? It's a vital issue, and we definitely need, I think, something. I mean, I'd like to see some concrete proposals for our next meeting in January, so that we've got a framework within which we're now working.
Councillor Smith.
Councillor Smith, yep, please. Am I hearing?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And excuse my, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, hello, yep, you're on.
Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to speak about, and excuse my ignorance if this already exists, Chair, because I'm new to the committee, but I'm just wondering if there is in place a development of a climate risk register, because obviously that would be very useful going forward for us to look at. And also in terms of the scrutiny panel, I could suggest a name, the Climate Emergency and Environment Scrutiny Panel, an additional scrutiny panel focusing essentially on the climate emergency and the environment. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think all these proposals we ought to be thinking about as we go forward. But your point about the risk framework, I think, is absolutely key. And you want to comment on that?
That's the sort of thing which we consider and review at the Environmental and Sustainable Board. So again, absolutely happy to take that discussion, yeah, of how we can enhance governance.
Yeah. Great, yeah. So I think that the commitment very much, as Councillor Smith's asked for, is that there should be such a risk, a framework of risk, a consideration of risk. Good. The only other matter arising was on item 10.2, Councillor Gordon's request for an update on temporary accommodation. And I think you were going to do that later on in the presentation, so we'll come back to that meeting. value for money discussion. Sorry, there's under item 14, the issue about value for money, and the update on the value for money, how it's dealt with by external auditors. We've actually just covered in the pre-meeting to this, but just to reassure members that, as I understand it now, the audit of the last year, i.e. the 2021, will include a full resume of a full assessment of our ability to generate a value for money. So I think it's a much more sophisticated framework. So I think we are moving in the right direction on that. Ian, do you want to add to that?
Just to build upon that, Chair, I'll be including in the finance update an overview of what that new regime looks like compared to the regime that was in place for 1920 as requested.
Very good, thank you. Okay, let's move on then to the next item, which is performance overview. And am I looking to Bruce to introduce it?
Thank you. I'm not going to talk too long because I think lots of the things you probably picked out are already on the agenda, so I'm still in one side, particularly the lack of housing things talking to you on the next item. But other things to pick out, the one is a couple extra on would be some good news in terms of increasing in recycling. There's been an increase in PCNs, which is related to LTNs, but we know that from previous experience this is normally a temporary sort of blip as they're introduced, and then things settle down again. But we also know that most of those are issues to majority of people outside of our inside the car. And just to sort of manage the number of complaints there is increasing, and this is about a third on 2019 in the comparative period. We suggest a period of 2020 for obvious reasons, because thinking we're all over the place in terms of numbers in sort of the first quarter of 2020. But we're up about a third, but that's pretty spread across the board, so it's not being driven by anything in particular. So we're still looking into that a little bit as to whether it's just a series of pent-up demand, getting the people set on for a number of months over the sort of pandemic. Sorry, Jack.
I'm hearing people not following you. I'm finding it quite difficult following. I can see some of the commentary here. I think it's just clarity of the audio. Are there particular items? I'm hearing certain of it, but I'm not sure I picked up all the issues.
If I shout without the
yeah, try that. Project.
The main thing is a lot of it's covered on the agenda.
Yeah.
So Steve's going to pick up all the sort of pretty much all the housing indicators that are in there in his presentation next. And obviously you've got the finance and resources risk register, so you know, picking up a lot of the items there. Picking out other items was increase in recycling, increase in PCNs, but that's related to low traffic neighbourhoods implementation, which is normally a temporary blip, and there's been an increase in complaints when we compare it to 2019, which is probably the best comparator, but that's spread across the board. No one particular area.
Okay, thanks. As you say, the key one that I really wanted to tackle, I'm pleased to say the Ashman is on the call, but Steve Waddington is going to tackle what I think, as you say, is the key issue that comes from this performance report, which is around debt, housing repair, voids, and so on. So we'll come back to those major issues. I suppose the only other thing that's also raised by that, Ian, is on council tax collection and rates collection, which isn't to do with the housing revenue account. So I don't know if there's anything you can say about the return that we hope to, well, both the collection of what's outstanding and a return to economic collection rates.
Absolutely, Chair. So as you know from when we did the update to budget and scrutiny chairs, we included an update on what we're doing around council tax recovery. We've started that recovery now, and also been able to add into the system those people who we hadn't been able to add in, i.e. people who've moved into the borough. So we are starting to see the benefit and the gain from that recovery, but it's going to be a journey over the next few months. So I'll be able to give further updates on that over the next few months.
Okay, thank you. The only other item I just thought it'd be is the concern about sickness levels and the extent what we can say about that in terms of underlying trends and COVID recovery and so on. I mean, it's obviously a very difficult to analyse it, but clearly we need to keep an eye on it, both from the point of view of staff's welfare and our ability to return our services. I don't know, Bruce, if you've got anything to add in that area.
Not too much. Only to say it is down slightly from the peak. Again, obviously still relatively high, but predominantly that's driven by long-term sickness, and a lot of that at the moment is delays of people waiting for interventions from, be that surgery or appointments or whatever else. So it's not predominantly driven by short-term, but probably long-term sickness.
Great, thanks very much. Now I have some questions from the on screen. Can I first of all welcome Mark Carroll, our new Chief Executive, to the Audit Committee. Absolutely delighted that he's seen in his first couple of weeks to join us. Mark, you had a question.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here. Inevitably, some of what I say will be fairly vague at this stage, given that I only started last Monday. And we'll pick that up on the risk register. I just want to pick up the point about sickness, just simply to say that at my first HMT this week, we talked about what our current sickness levels. We had a bit of analysis of what was happening in the different directorates, and have committed to taking forward some work in relation to that, particularly, I think, as Bruce was just saying, in relation to people who've been on long-term sick, and just understanding what actions we so that we understand those individual situations. So we will return to this. So you're right to highlight it, and it's one of those things that we will return to and give you a fuller picture as we set out our actions.
Great. No, I welcome that. I think it's exactly, we do need a proper investigation of it. It's a complex issue, as you say. And I have Councillor Smythe asking a question.
Thank you, Chair. Just back to Bruce about the recycling rates. Just wondering.
You've gone. Was there somebody else that was asking a question? He's got the dreaded mute button on.
I must have actually muted myself rather than unmuted myself. Sorry, it's about recycling rates, Chair. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to ask Bruce if we're in line with our projections and aims for recycling, and in essence, what will happen next to kind of drive our recycling rates up to the 65% that the Mayor of London wants. Thank you. Did you hear that?
Yep. No, I'm looking to Bruce to see if he can answer that.
Not answer off the top of my head, Councillor, but I will find out for you, and I will come back to you during the week.
I mean, it is a crucial number, as we know, a crucial objective of the council, and crucial from a financial point of view as well. So yeah, if you can minute that, because I think we should all get that response. I don't think it's just a Councillor Smith concern.
Thank
Excellent.
you,
Any other issues? Yep, AJ, I've got.
On page 31, it says time taken to process new housing benefit claims, and it says the performance measure is unlikely to resume prior to 2022-23. So my question is this measure important in your management of the housing benefit team, or is it just for our benefit?
I'm more happy to answer that, and Rob's also on the call, so he may want to chip in, but the reality of the cyber attack has meant our ability to calculate that has been compromised because of the impact on the systems. Members of the committee have seen previous presentations of this, will have seen over the last 5-6 years in particular how our performance in terms of HB processing has significantly improved and was down to on average about 10 days, which when you consider some councils were running at 25 to 30 days, and the volume of caseload we have, the complexity of caseload we have is impressive. Obviously, the team is working through the issues with cyber attack, and where cases have to be addressed urgently, we have a process for dealing with that. So, I would be hopeful that very soon, and that's what we put in financial year 22-23, we'll be able to gain report on the basis of how we perform against that indicator.
Great, thanks. I have Rob Miller raising a hand. I don't know if he wants to add to that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the only thing I would add to Ian's update there is that we're anticipating that for residents making new claims or submitting changes of circumstances, housing benefits claims will be processed within the sort of timescales they would normally have expected prior to the cyber attack by the new year. We're working now through the backlog of cases that accumulated while systems were offline, and the team have been making very good progress working through those. So we still have work to do. As Ian says, the PIs should be measurable again from next year, but to reassure members, residents' claims are now being processed, and the team are working very hard to get through the backlog.
Good. So hopefully by then we are now dealing with the past rather than adding to our problems. I think that's a key issue. Good. Any other questions on the performance report? Can I just say, I think the time is probably right to have just a look at these measures as both, are they still the right ones? The intention was always to keep an eye on key outcomes for the council. They've been in place for 2 or 3 years, well, 3 or 4 years now, actually. And I think it's probably right, particularly in light of the sort of issues around the cyber attack and the systems problems that have been highlighted, that we have another look at those. And so I would like to perhaps work with officers on this and come up with some proposals, either to say, yes, this is the right framework, or to add or subtract some measures. Still within the same framework of keeping sort of a couple of dozen key indicators there, but just making sure they're the right ones for going ahead. Good. Okay, with that, can we move forward then to the next item, which is the have we got the terms of reference? Is that? I've leapt over what was item 4. Right, apologies here. And we've got a report on the overall financial, the OFP report from Ian.
Great stuff. So, as we've done at previous committee meetings, what we do is we give an overview presentation of what's in the overall financial position report that you've got in paperwork this evening. It's on screen.
Yep,
it's on. Can everyone externally see that? And can you hear us okay? We're not going to use the microphones in here. I think that was what was causing some of the interference before.
If you can project.
But I'll project.
Yes.
Indeed.
AJ has got a teacher's projection. I think we should all take it from advice.
This evening is then a forecast of the current year financial position for both the general fund and the housing revenue account, which Steve will speak more about later on. We'll also set out some of the expenditure control measures that we've looked to bring in. I'll give a quick overview of the latest announcements in terms of what was said about adult social care. Give a quick overview of where we are in terms of the budget for 22-23 and the timeline we're now on to get to a position of agreeing that budget. As part of the minutes and the discussion we had at the last meeting, members asked for an overview of where we are in terms of financial resilience and some of those indicators that you'll have seen previously. I'll also give committee an update on where we are with the accounts, the external audit contracts, and in particular discussions that have been taking place between all of local government, led by the LGA with PSAA, which is the Public Sector Auditing Authority. And then finally, as I outlined in the Chair's introduction, I'll give an overview of the external auditor's VFM assessment for financial year 2021, which is going to be the first year of the new assessment. So quite a few things to run through. So what I'll do, Chair, is I'm happy to take questions as we go, but could I ask that people just let me know when there's questions, because I can't see on my screen what's happening. So the latest forecast position in terms of the outturn for 2021-22 set out in the OFP that went to committee in September is an overspend of £6.5 million, and that's after we included the provisions we made for additional COVID costs, recognising the pressures that children's services are under in terms of recovering from Ofsted, and also the monies we set aside to help deal with cyber. So obviously a challenging position, and it's certainly one when I look at what I'm seeing across London, not just London boroughs, but actually across the country. I see, councils really struggling to maintain that balanced budget position. But what we're now looking to do is bring into play measures to bring that overspend down, to stop it growing, and to make sure we maintain our council's strong financial position. Some of the things in there would be, as you'd expect, we're seeing additional places coming forwards in relation to children placements, staffing cost pressures, care packages in adult services. As an example, we had a care package only the other week, which cost nearly £500,000, and we do see increasing numbers of expensive cases coming through the system. Also within neighbourhoods and housing, we're seeing challenges not just in relation to the planning service, which has seen a major reduction in the number of major planning applications, which tend to drive planning performance agreements, but also an increase in those smaller applications coming in, which tend to be more costly to administer than the larger applications, as well as some losses of income for things like where the commercial waste fleet operate, and other those fees and charges which you're familiar. So both cyber and COVID costs do exceed the contingency sums, and that's how we get to the overspend of £6.5 million. On the basis of seeing that information come forward, the corporate management team in September agreed for a range of controls to be brought in to look to make sure that any non-essential spend that had minimal impact on services was brought under further control. And what we've looked to agree was a series of measures as set out on the slide in front of you. So, for example, a further review of any recruitments that we were to undertake. Finance teams working closely with directors, budget holders to review the forecast spend, particularly on those non-essential lines, to make sure that any of those were going to be captured to minimise any overspend. And also an area which the council has placed great focus on previously, but can still go further, is around our reliance on still a significant number of agency staff. That doesn't mean the agency staff don't do a fantastic piece of work, but it is something we just need to keep a focus on. And again, directors, in a similar way to how the corporate management team yesterday agreed to do further review of the sickness data, has also been working through all the agency staff on reports that we've produced. DMTs have also agreed to implement a cap of 36 hours on agency assignments and to ensure that leave is taken. And finally, working with colleagues across the council, finance teams have been looking to make sure that where there's a capital scheme with a reliance upon revenue contributions, we're looking to see whether they can be delayed or amended. And my intention is to bring back the outcome of this work in the report, which will take to November's cabinet in relation to the overall financial position, which will be the outturn position as at the end of the month just gone, so September, so the half-year point in the financial year. Turning to the housing revenue account, we're forecasting at this point an overspend position of just under £4 million, predominantly made up by a number of factors. £2.5 million loss of rental income, monies lost by the DLO in terms of repairs they haven't been able to undertake, predominantly because of issues with the restrictions, which are now lifted, and then some loss of income on commercial rental income. At the moment, we're looking to meet that overspend by reducing the revenue contribution that the HRA makes to maintenance and delivery of the capital programme, and that, though, as we all know, isn't a sustainable strategy. So what we're looking to do is identify further measures for future years to look to bring the HRA into balance and also to address the significant increase we've seen in rent arrears. So what are the budget risks? Rent collection continues to be a challenge, not just due to the pandemic, and that had impact, as you all appreciate, on tenants' ability to pay. It also had impact on our ability, due to the cyber attack, to actually track and process what was actually happening. But also we saw the backlog in courts limiting our ability to have at least the lever to progress possession cases, which does have a significant impact on people's behaviours. And I think all those factors combined have had a real impact upon rent collection. But I know Steve and his team, working closely with colleagues across the council, are looking to make sure we get that position back into a better place, and I'm sure you'll talk about that a bit more in a moment, Steve. There's obviously an impact to the slowdown of the capital programme, because that can often lead to an increase in reactive repairs. And then we've got the long-standing London-wide issue about the Thames Water Agency accounts, where there's some debate about whether some monies need to be returned or otherwise. So,
I've got Councillor Smythe raising it. Is this an issue of detail here, or do you want to come back at the end, Gilbert?
Sorry, it's just that Ian said that maybe he could take questions whilst he goes through the report. I don't know.
No, if you've got a sort of detail, a particular question.
I mean, well, I don't know. I mean,
clarification, particularly if it's clarification.
You might not be able to answer this way, but which capital schemes are to be reviewed? I mean, maybe this is outside of your remit. Maybe you don't know. And also, in regards to rent collection, what are the risks going forward, and how can we mitigate against non-payment going forward?
Bear in mind that we're going to ask Steve Warrington, the head of housing, on under item 7 to address these very issues. But you're absolutely right; there's absolutely key issue. But I think let's leave it to that. Great. You want to carry on
those questions, Chair, if that's helpful? I mean, very, very quickly, Councillor Smythe, in terms of the capital programme, not just in relation to the housing revenue account, but also non-housing revenue account schemes, we've looked to review the sources of financing that are being used for all schemes to see where, in particular, it's a revenue contribution source. There's opportunities to either defer or delay those schemes, and what we'll be looking to do is incorporate any of those plans or proposals in the report that I bring to Cabinet in November. Obviously work closely with Cabinet members and the Mayor in terms of any final decisions on that, but we're working through the programme. I suppose in relation to the housing revenue account, though, of course, we have got flexibility in terms of the way the maintenance contracts work, and again that enables us to delay some of that spend. And also, it's pretty fair to say that some of those contracts aren't in the place where necessarily the service would want them to be. Again, Steve can pick that up later. Members will also recall that as part of the rent setting process for not even this year, actually it was the year before, we implemented a significant package of support for all residents in our stock to have support should they get into difficulty paying monies. And a big policy in relation to that was the Council's one approach to corporate debt, which has certainly been looked at this committee and at scrutiny in previous iterations, which again is that package of wraparound care and support we've put for residents to make sure that they're supported. I'm not sure, Chair, if there's any more questions.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So, adult social care funding announcements, thought it was just useful to clarify for members what the position here is. So you'll have all seen the announcements about the government's plans for healthcare, adult social care and new funding plan, announced on the 7th of September. Key elements of that were for an increase not only in the employer contribution for national insurance, but also the employee contribution, and that was an increase of 1.25 percentage points. So it's probably worth bearing in mind that on the employer's side and the employee's side, on average it's around 10 or 11%, so actually a 1.25 percentage point increase is nearer a 9-10% increase in the cost to either the individual or the employer. So as an example, for the council, you're talking for the general fund around about a £3 million increase in costs. Now, the guidance which we were issued did suggest that we would be funded for that. What I haven't got clarity on at this point is exactly what that really means. Does that mean all of our direct employed staff? How does that treat staff costs which we pay through commissioning, either to third parties or through contracts? All of that's unclear, and there's currently discussions ongoing with between officials and the treasurers' societies to see how that can be done in a way that truly compensates councils, as opposed to it getting lost within the local government finance system. I think also it's probably fair to say, and Councillor Kennedy, I'm sure, may want to chip in at this point, that despite significant promises that, you know, the adult social care problem would be solved in terms of funding, the reality of the packages so far are we're struggling as a team, and we haven't seen the final detail yet to see whether that will truly be the case. It does look to almost exclusively focus on funding mechanisms and personal financial protections, not the adult social care pressures, which I know have been a topic which is well rehearsed amongst local government now for many decades, it feels. So just wanted to give colleagues an update on that.
Very helpful. I see we've got Councillor Kennedy maybe wanting to make a contribution on that key issue.
Yes, thank you, Chair. While we're talking about it, I mean, don't take it from Ian and I, take it from Stephen Chandler, who is the Director of the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, who said, after a few days of looking at the most recent government announcement, it is unlikely that a single penny of that will ultimately be seen on the balance sheets of local authorities.
Well, yes, a frank and I'm sure very plausible prediction. Thanks for that. Okay, yeah, carry on. Yeah.
So, in terms of where we are, Chair, around savings and development for the budget for 22-23, as you all know, we've been working closely with colleagues across the council to develop options and proposals to close the budget gap which we identified for 22-23 of just over £11 million, increasing by another £12.6 million for 2023-24. So far, proposals which have been identified and are being worked through have reduced that gap to just under £3 million, and that does assume an increase in council tax of 1.99%. That is the maximum at this point in time we're allowed to increase council tax by. Obviously, we're awaiting the announcements on the 27th of October in the comprehensive spending review to give us more certainty about what actually the fiscal envelope for local government will be, albeit I suspect at that point we won't see the actual control totals for Hackney and by individual local authorities until much later in the day, although from the discussions we've been having with officials through the Treasury Societies, they are going to try and get us as much information as soon as possible after that date, which would be really helpful. And as always, once that's understood, interpreted, received, I'll always do an update for this committee and members on scrutiny as well. So, as you can see, work still to be done, and I would expect over the coming months there'll be further discussions in a number of places, be it scrutiny, be it with respective groups around where we are with that, and be bringing updates through Cabinet in the RFP. In terms of some key dates, we're aiming to get the budget all agreed at Cabinet on the 21st of February through to full council on the 23rd of February. So now quite a tight timeline, but as you know, we've got a track record of delivering against that, and you know, we'll get there and make sure that's all sorted out. HRA budget update. Great work's been done to get the HRA position into place. So far, savings of around 1.6 million have been identified. We're awaiting announcements about what the CPI rate will be for this month of September, expected later this week. And the model there, of course, is CPI plus 1%. That's what's built into HRA business plans. Just for reference, really, members may have seen that the inflation rate in August was just over 3%, so I wouldn't expect it to be any less in September. So based upon the formula, that would be indicating something of the order of a rent increase of over 4%. The budget risks and pressures are the ones we've talked about already, as well as some of those inflationary pressures. HRA particularly has challenges in terms of the utility costs and also impacts, like all of the council, on various parts of its supply chain and materials. I'll pause there, Chair, before going on to some of the points really which were covered more in the minutes in terms of actions to follow up on, but unless colleagues are happy for me to continue. Not seeing any indications to stop, so I'll keep going. So for Financial Resilience Index was initially published back in February 2021, and what that does is it shows a council's position on a range of measures or indicators associated with financial risk. These indicators take publicly available data, and there are 9 primary indicators and 7 secondary indicators. Each index is designed to allow boroughs to compare their financial position as defined by a set of indicators against other boroughs in its class. So for us, that would be London boroughs or groups of boroughs, i.e. nearest neighbours. Taking all the primary and secondary indicators together, our risk position is moderate to moderate low, and as such our overall financial health is positive. But we know, as you would expect me to say this, wouldn't you, but we must not be complacent, especially in light of the ongoing impacts of COVID-19 and the cyber attack. What are risks to financial health? Well, I think there's no real surprise in this list here. So just very quickly, impact of the cyber attack on key systems, especially those concerned with income generation and collection, and then ability to get after that debt. We've also seen challenges, particularly on those income streams such as council tax, business rates, benefit overpayments, and the variety of fees and charges we have. Impact of cyber attack on costs, especially in ICT and revenues and benefits core services. We are having to look at accelerating spend on some of those systems that we may have replaced in a year to 18 months, as you've been notified of in the updates that Rob and myself have given to this meeting and to other meetings already. We are also seeing ongoing cost pressures resulting from COVID-19, particularly in adult social care and some of that long COVID effect, as well as the impact in children's homelessness, rough sleeping, and revenues and benefits. Ongoing income pressures from COVID continue across the country around council tax, and I think that will only be exacerbated as the cost of living pressures come home to bite. And there's still great uncertainty on business rates, particularly in the smaller business sector, where some of those businesses' viability is much more marginal than some of the large corporates, which throughout the pandemic, and I think here particularly of those institutions in the square mile, which effectively have been able to operate almost as normal, and looking at their profit and loss accounts continue to make the sorts of returns they've been expecting to do. That wouldn't have been the case for those smaller businesses that generally had to close and may not see the footfall they previously had coming back. We've also got to be live to the possible impact of the spending review on external funding. What will that mean for funding for local authorities, and particularly over the whole, whether it's a 3-year or 4-year period. The adverse impact of fairer funding review and business rates reset is also something that we need to keep an eye on, and we'll update members as soon as we know more information about it. And then, as always, we've got those non-COVID pressures in place, like adults, children's homelessness and planning. So back to a topic the Audit Committee is familiar with. As we updated at the pre-meet before this session, the auditor's opinion on the council's 2019-20 financial statements is imminent, and the chair and I hope to be able to sign off the AGR in relation to 19-20 tomorrow on the financial statements. Following the cyber attack on council systems, the auditors were unable to conclude the VFM arrangements audit, but work is continuing to ongoing with Mazars to get that position clarified. And again, from discussions that we've been holding back end of last week and into this week, a report should be available soon, and one would hope to be able to update this committee about when that will be concluded fairly shortly. Turning to 2021, the team, as we've outlined previously, are working to get draft accounts available at the end of this month, and discussions are being held with the auditors in terms of getting the timeline for the audit of those accounts into play, so that we can get the accounts for 2021 put to bed well before anything starts in relation to 2021-22. A lot of years going tonight. Jay also asked for an update on the external audit contract. So the process for retendering for external audit in local authorities in England for contracts due to start is now underway. The public sector audit appointments body is the organisation nominated by the government to run the arrangements. What would be required is for a full council resolution to be made by us by the 11th of March to see if an authority wishes to opt into those arrangements. If the council, of course, doesn't make that decision, legislation assumes the council will procure its own external auditor. Notwithstanding the recent experience that we've had in relation to PSAA contract and some of the frustrations, not just Hackney, but other local authorities have found, we do need to be mindful that to consider potential alternatives is not an insignificant administrative burden, and also we also need to make sure there's an independence process and mindful of what options exist in terms of who could undertake that work. And we'll be bringing a more detailed report in relation to this to Audit Committee in January. And of course, before that, Chair, we'll have further discussions with yourself and the Cabinet Member for Finance, of course, the Mayor. So maybe pause there if there's any questions, or happy to go on.
No.
So in terms of external auditors, VFM assessment for 2020-21. So the external auditor is required to consider whether the authority has put in place proper arrangements to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness in its use of resources. They no longer give a value for money conclusion, but will provide a commentary against 3 reporting criteria. First is financial sustainability, how the authority plans and manages its resources to ensure it can continue to deliver its services. Governance, how the authority ensures that it makes informed decisions and properly manages its risks. And improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, how the authority uses information about its costs, performance to improve the way it manages services and ultimately it delivers those services. The auditors focus on the arrangements that the authority has in place for the year under audit, and however the authority can cope with future challenges cuts across all 3 reporting criteria. If the auditor identifies any significant weaknesses in those arrangements, they should report the weaknesses and recommendations for improvement to the Audit Committee as soon as possible and not wait for the audit report on the accounts. So I think that, Chair, particularly in relation to some of the points you've made over not just this year but previous years as well, about getting that sight on the future view of the health of the organisation is a real positive change. There is also a significant read across between areas covered in the VFM assessment and also what's in SIPFA's financial management code. We included in our budget report in February 2021 our assessment against the SIPFA financial management code, the first year that it was effectively mandatory to do that. And avid readers of the budget report will recall that in the previous financial year, when it wasn't mandatory, we also did a self-assessment based upon the draft to make sure that we were prepared for what that contained. And I took a version of that through the corporate management team and wider leadership team to make sure, again, they were all aware of what's in that code, because it's not just a responsibility of the Section 151 officer and his team, but it is also a responsibility of all senior officers in the council, but also members as well. And that is the end of the slideshow.
Great, thanks very much, Ian. Well, a number of sort of issues arising from that. I wonder, particularly in light of the challenge around, if you like, that you've highlighted. One is the current budget gap, and secondly, the sort of looking ahead, some of the gaps that you've talked about, and our financial management of the future. Whether Councillor Chapman wants just to add to Ian's report to reassure us that the executive is confident that the current budget gap can be closed with those measures, and secondly, in terms of looking ahead, whether the exercise, as I understand it, of matching our corporate priorities to a financial future, our financial resources, that exercise seems to me crucial to the Audit Commission's responsibility for picking up on the point Ian's just been making about value for money, and the test that will come So I don't know, Councillor Chapman, whether you want just to add to that before I ask for questions from colleagues.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in respect to the current year's projected deficit, which is around 6 million, as you'll see from the OFP report, obviously this is a serious and is of concern, but at this stage we're not regarding it as something that threatens the sort of financial position of the authority. I mean, if the worst comes to the worst, we have reserves. And as Ian has outlined to you, HMT have now set out a course of a number of actions which we expect will bring that back into balance for the current year. And we'll have an update of that at the November Cabinet, which we can then report on here. In respect of next year's budget, 22-23, again, we've outlined in this report progress on bringing forward proposals to balance that, and you'll see the Director set out a list of potential reductions in budget to bring that back in balance for the 11 million gap that we were originally looking at. I have to just slightly caution that not all those have been completely signed off by the Mayor and Cabinet yet, but I expect that they substantially will be soon, and I look forward to taking you or helping the officers to take you through those at our the Audit and Scrutiny meeting we're having on the 25th of October. Yep. So.
Yeah, just on. So I absolutely appreciate that, and be very helpful to have that update, as you say, at the end of October, and that will provide an important reassurance. I guess the concern that we also had was that we're not just into kind of salami cuts. That what we, I think, commend is your proposed approach to try and look at a forward look at our policy objectives and our financial resources to ensure we've got a sort of positive management of resources rather than just as I say, a salami cuts approach to the future. And I think it's a very important commitment that's been made, and one I would certainly commend, because I think it's crucial to going to the test for value for money and long-term, the longer-term value for money that Ian was talking about earlier. So, Rob, would you be able to just say something about that?
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you at the end there. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. As I was going to say, I mean, the gap for 23-24 is an additional 12 million on the gap we're looking for this year. Obviously, some of the proposals we're making now will reach that, but the major piece of work that is going on and started over the summer is the I don't know if you ever settled on a final name for it, but the priority-based budget review, which aims, exactly as you say, to basically not just, I mean, most budget decisions, I mean, in the current year are really made on the margins, aren't they? You know, you start with a big lump and you offer up savings and you take off, you know, in good years you have a bit of growth, but right on the edges of things. Well, the aim of the priority-based budget review is to look at all the council's priorities, what our resource needs are, and then match those to, you know, to resources to enable us to make decisions on exactly where our priorities are, and and measuring resources against those. Ian may be able to update you on where we are on that, but what I know a lot of work is going on it, and I've asked that we clarify the timeline and you know, expected sort of, if you want, terms of reference on that, so we're clear on you know, when it will report and what sort of manner it will report. And I'm also clear it needs to be related to the other exercises going on in relation to corporate planning, capital review, medium-term financial planning, which are all important towards that. And of course, all of us have an interest in this as we formulate our various political proposals to put forward for consideration by the electorate. And all these things have got to run together, and I think they're absolutely important in being able to make a sort of coherent decision as to where we should put our very, very limited amounts of money going forward in the future.
Great, thanks very much for that reassurance, and look forward maybe at our January meeting to get an update on that process, hopefully with some content rather than just talking about the process itself. Great, thanks very much, Rob. Right, questions on Ian and Rob's work? I saw Gilbert, yes, come in. And Ian then, after that, Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And if this is not relevant to Ian, just please say, and we can. It could be a question for somebody else. But the figures around loss and repairs of 1.2 million. I mean, that's a staggering amount. Can you just explain a little bit more about how we've managed to lose that amount of money in repairs? And the other question is on rent increases of 4%. I mean, obviously, you know, our citizens are under a lot of pressure financially. It's all over the news at the moment, you know, the stress of the cost of living crisis, etc. 4% rise. I mean, how much is that going to cost each individual household, and how much will that raise altogether if we go down that road? Thank you.
Great. Well, can I defer that again, because I'm assuming that the presentation we're about to hear under item 7 from the Director of Housing is going to answer exactly those two questions. If I can receive that reassurance. Yes, I'm getting a nod, Gilbert. So, well, key issues that you've raised, we'll come back to. Next one was, Ian, you wanted to come in?
Sorry, Chair, just if I could just clarify a point based on what Councillor Smythe raised. At this point, no decisions around rent increases have been taken. The point I was making was based upon the formula that's currently been in play for many years, announced by the government, that would be the impact if CPI plus 1% was made. There are still further discussions to be had with the executive, scrutiny with members in relation to decisions going forward, as is the case with council tax. So please just be very clear about what I said, as opposed to I wasn't saying that.
Helpful context for that more detailed answer. I hope we're going to get it from Director of Housing. Very good. And I've got Ian Rathbone, please, Councillor Rathbone.
Thank you, Chair. This committee is always very difficult for me because everybody keeps talking about Ian, and I keep thinking, oh, it's me. Oh,
apologies, no, my fault.
It's him. It's that other Ian. So no, that's fine. Now, really, I was just echoing what Gilbert was saying at the end. I just wondered about CTRS relief, about our residents in all of this. How much are we going to be able to help them to cope with it? I don't know, obviously there's an answer perhaps coming to do with housing and rent rise and so on, but what about other things? How can we help them to cope with the considerable pressure that they're under, particularly as, you know, rent arrears have risen? How are we going to deal with it in a way which actually doesn't, in fact, just burden people with even more arrears and, you know, possible eviction?
Right, I don't know. I mean, particularly CTRS point is, I think, a good one, which won't come under. So whether Ian Williams can answer that.
I don't know if Councillor Chapman wants to come in first, but I'm happy to go first. That works for you, Councillor Chapman.
Well, on CTRS particularly.
Yeah. What sort of commitments are we making on CTRS in light of the pressures?
As you'll know, we have an ambition to restore the level of CTRS support over a period. And you also know that there's a scrutiny review underway at looking at basically that and CTRS in full, including an assessment of the benefits or otherwise of CTRS, and whether that's a correct ambition or whether there are more effective ways of doing that. I have said that I don't at this moment. I mean, obviously, in relation to the current the budget for 22/3, we have not identified any resources where we might be able to increase the CTRS support for this year. Although we're hopeful that if there is leeway on the council tax rate in relation to social care, that there will be a similar sort of support from the government in relation to the sort. If you remember, they had a one-off offer last year, which enabled us to give support. I think it was £60 a household, wasn't it, on the C2S pay? So we hope that we are entirely in the lap of the government for that. So I think the current position is difficult. The ambition remains.
Thanks very much, Rob. I mean, I think the issue there of, particularly in light of the cut in universal credit, hopefully the government may see this one route to compensate. Yes,
absolutely.
Ian Williams.
Remind members if they hadn't seen it. We have been notified that we're going to receive just over £3 million in this current financial year for what's called the Household Support Fund, if memory serves me right. There's so many names of different funds the last 12 months that I did forget, but that's a fund which we have some discretion in how we administer it. And at the moment, the team, we only just got the guidance in the past week, is working through options and proposals for that. So expect there to be some announcements about how that will be deployed coming out to members shortly. So want to lose sight of that.
Helpful. Rob Chapman wanted to come back in.
I just wonder that's. I mean, obviously that's it's good that we've got that, but just to put it into focus, the actual cut in the £20 uplift in universal credit, well, that was worth 35 million to residents of the borough, and the hardship fund is 2 million.
Yeah, no, thanks for that very important contextual point. Michelle Gregory, Councillor Gregory, do you?
Thank you. Just something we were discussing at the scrutiny. Ian, can you just tell us how much of the hardship fund has been spent this year, and has all of it been given out, or are we still at a very low grant position where we still have a lot in the budget? Thanks.
That's Ian Williams, not Ian Rathbone, by the way.
As you're aware, Councillor Gregory, and I'm kicking myself now for not finding the time to go and find the exact figure in terms of how much we've spent so far this year. I do know when I last looked at it, we certainly haven't spent all the money, but we have made sure again that amount of money is protected, and any unspent balance that will be still there at year end would as always be carried forward to sort of top up the subsequent years. But we are spending more than in previous years, and what I'll do is after this meeting get the latest figure. I should have made sure I had that to hand.
Yeah, I mean, I hope we've got a plan to spend it over the budget period. Carry forwards are not a good way of managing budgets.
What we did do, building upon the work that was came out of the approach, one approach to corporate debt, was make sure that we communicated that much more clearly in the council tax bills and leaflets that went out, and in other literature as well. So I know the team have had more demand for it, as you'd expect, because of circumstances, but also on the back of the publicity.
Good, thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions, let's move on in terms of the agenda. And by the way, my mismanagement of the performance report left one area out, well, the corporate risk and capital programme. I'm looking. I'm not sure who can.
Yeah, I'll give a quick overview, Chair, if that's okay.
Thanks. Yeah, good.
So yeah, the appendix you're talking about is just a brief overview of the current corporate risks, which were presented in full at the last meeting in July, and they've been updated since then. They continue to be dominated by the pandemic, with the uncertainty and potential negative impact it continues to present over the coming months. And this cascades through to other risks, particularly relating, as Ian's spoken about, to the economic downturn, reduced budgets, and specific areas like temporary accommodation and universal credit. Impacts of the cyber attacks still feature, as you'll see later this meeting, because it's obviously an extremely important part of the finance and corporate resources risk register. I mean, clearly the incident happened in the past, but the current increased vulnerabilities present new risks. So the full iteration of this corporate risk register will be presented at the next meeting in a few months. But yeah, for the rest of this meeting, risk-wise, the focus is primarily on the Chief Executive's risks and F&R.
Great, thanks very much, Matthew. I mean, just a couple of comments which I think we both covered, which was one on the climate, that the corporate climate risks are not mentioned in this, and I think therefore we've got to find a way to incorporate climate into the risk profile at a corporate level. And as we were saying earlier, I think the proposals for that are now in train, and I look forward to those coming. The second issue, which again has been covered, is the only increased risk in this schedule was around workforce, and Mark Carroll indicated that work was now in train on that, so I'm reassured that we will see a review of that, so thanks for that. Second item was just on capital. I just had one question on that, and unless any other members have, which was my concern that slippage is having had a deep dive review in which we were trying to pin slippage back from the current 30-odd% to 20%. I know, so I'm told that other local authorities have got it back to 10%. In our first report, we've gone straight to 30% with a slippage of 71 million. Now, I know before you get into it that there's going to be talks about the references to cyber and, well, particularly the pandemic. We know, particularly in the housing field, which we'll hear more about. But clearly that raised a concern for me in terms of already slipping back quite seriously on our capital budget. Right, Jackie Moylan, you want to say something about that?
We're forecasting at 20% down on the budget in February. There's some areas which are impacted more significantly, and that tends to be around the housing supply programme, estate regen and housing repairs. And as we've always said, there are going to be legitimate reasons why, in some cases, those programmes would slip. And for example, Stephen will know better than me, but on the housing supply and the estate regen programme, we've had instances of tenders that come back much higher than the estimates due to cost inflation in the construction sector, and more work needs to be done to get those projects into a position of viability. Really, I think in the sense that, although yes, I agree we're not where we want to be, there are in this instance some very good reasons why that is the case, particularly around those programmes. And similarly on the asset management side on housing, again, I think Steve would talk about the slowdown of some of the contract work on properties, which again is impacted significantly on the forecast position for the year.
Good, yeah, and I mean, I know there are special reasons for it. Equally, I don't want to lose our ability to see a real improvement on our capital estimation and capital management, because I think, as we identified in the deep dive, there are certainly gaps and issues to address. So maybe at the January meeting, again, you can comment on pulling apart some of those factors that you talked about, so that we can focus on our own performance. Okay, right, now we move on to Code of Corporate Governance, and I understand we've got Andrew Spragg on the call, who's, I understand, ill. I hope you're recovering, Andrew. You want to just briefly introduce this, because I don't think it's got a big content, but it's important that we endorse the changes.
Thanks very much, Chair, and apologies I can't be there in person. But just to set out the context of the committee, the Code of Corporate Governance isn't a required document. However, it's recognised best practice as set out in the CIPFA note regarding local authority governance in 2016. We originally produced a Code of Corporate Governance under the internal audit team in 2017. We subsequently have taken that and decided that rather than one department own the document and the responsibility for keeping it up to date, we would actually hold it corporately in the Excellence in Governance group, which reports to HMT on a number of governance matters. We did a desktop review with a number of the owners of the different actions in that Code of Corporate Governance in the early spring through to late spring. Over the summer, it was considered at HMT, and group directors reviewed it with their direct reports, and it was subsequently signed off by the acting chief exec in September. Just in terms of things that have changed, as the report sets out, there was a a bulletin issued by CIPFA earlier this year to say that people should be looking at their code of corporate governance in the light of the pandemic, and also obviously in our case, the cyber attack as well. So we've added an additional appendix to that, which Rob Miller is here this evening to talk a little bit about, just setting out the impact of those two aspects on our governance processes the last year. Given that a number of them are quite time limited things, we are proposing that appendix would be part of the code for this year. In subsequent years, we take that back, recognising that actually best endeavour and best practice governance is set out in the actual code itself. Members will probably want to know what's changed, and I fully appreciate it can be a little bit difficult when we haven't got a like-for-like comparison. But just to clarify, the main areas of change move from page 4 onwards, where we've got the core principles and the sub-principles that are set out by CIPFA. The right-hand column, which is the evidence of compliance and supporting documentation, primarily the refresh has been in that column. So it's been looking at what we had previously said we did in 2017 and updating that to reflect our current position in 2021. And I believe that's it. Rob, did you have anything you wanted to add at all?
Good. Thanks very much, Andrew. Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. And Chair, I shan't take you through the document, but what we've tried to do there is, through the context of the Code of Corporate Governance, set out how our response to both the COVID pandemic and the cyber attack has ensured robust governance in place, whilst the organisation has also had to respond at pace and with urgency to two extraordinarily significant events. So hopefully that sort of provides some assurance in terms of the approaches taken, but I'd be very happy to take any questions.
Great. Do I have any questions? No, I think you've reassured us. No, Councillor Smythe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just intrigued, really. I think it's a really great document, having sort of flicked through it. But in terms of one of the core principles, behaving with integrity, demonstrating strong commitment to ethical values, how do we assess whether our values are ethical or not?
Well, without a good question. I don't want to turn this into a philosophical inquiry as to kind of Aristotelian pursuit of virtue, good governance.
If I may, Chair, I think I can answer some of the points that Councillor Smith has raised. As you're aware, there are a set of core principles that are set out for those holding public office that we commonly refer to as the Nolan principles, and they're sort of 7 principles around openness, integrity, things like that. So they're well recognised, I think, across the sector as being some of those core principles. In terms of how that sort of plays out in respect to our own policies and practice, we obviously have a code of conduct for members and staff that reiterate the importance of those. We make an effort to do decision making in a transparent way, and part of that obviously is by transacting the business of our committees in public, so that residents are able to see the discussions that are being had. We also have a standards committee, and as you know, Dawn Clarkson-MacDonald, as our monitoring officer, regularly reports to that standards committee about where there are issues around code of conduct for members. In addition, we have some established staff procedures around acceptance of gifts and hospitality, likewise the register of members' interests. So I think there are a core number of things that sit within there. I think it is an interesting challenge, and it is a discussion that I suspect happens in many local authorities across the country, but obviously through engagement with the LGA and other bodies that have a role in defining those standards, we are reasonably confident that we hold ourselves to them. What I would flag is that the standards committee will be referring its annual report to full council next week, and actually that sets out quite a bit of what's done around the standards regime for members.
Great, thanks very much, Andrew. I mean, just to one of the concerns I had, this rightly says we need to ensure that there are outcomes specified, and certainly I think there's work to be done in a number of areas in defining those outcomes. So, which is why I put a lot of weight on Councillor Chapman's commitment to matching corporate objectives to financial projections, because one of the virtues of that will be the importance of defining what your objectives are and what outcomes you expect. So I think it's helpful to see the code is reinforcing that point. Good. Okay, so do we approve this or we just note it?
The recommendation is to note, Chair, that the code's managed by the Chief Executive, so it's the Chief Exec's responsibility to agree.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, we move on then to item 7. There's a much heralded presentation from our new head of housing, Steve Waddington. So can I first introduce, get him to introduce himself, and then I think he's going to try and address some of the questions that have been raised earlier in the meeting. So welcome, Steve, first of all.
Good evening, Chair, and thank you. Yeah, I'm Steve Waddington, the new Strategic Director of Housing. And like I say, I think there's things I've added into this presentation as we've gone along through the evening so far. So I was asked at the last meeting to come with an update on what we've been doing around recovery from the cyber attack and particularly the future development. I think it's fair to say housing, a lot of the council was significantly impacted by the cyber attack. It wiped out the whole of the system, the whole of our property data, the whole of our tenant data. So we did quickly an exercise to understand the business priorities, looking at what we needed to do to maintain delivering a service, continue to collect income streams, but also to ensure we understood what the impact of the loss of service was on residents. As a result of that, there was just over 100 priorities implemented and interim solutions put in place to around 95% of those. And we're now working through work that we actually started pre-cyber attack around developing new IT solutions, but based around the service delivery and the principles around putting residents first as part of the Modern Tools for Housing programme. I normally hate slides like this that's got a lot of information on and pictures, but actually it just does go to show around the impact of the cyber attack. It did take out our core housing database, which was universal housing, but that was actually supporting 30 other systems that relied on universal housing for data that enabled us to deliver different bits of the service. So we are replacing that legacy housing system, and that started prior to the prior to the cyber attack. But as you'll see from this, without getting into the detail, actually it's the yellow ones that are actually the Hackney hosted ones. All of the others were linked in and linked back to universal housing. Picking up on repairs, I mean, there's two key indicators that this committee looks at around percentage of repairs completed first time and percentage of repairs completed in time. Both first one's from a customer satisfaction perspective, the second one is actually from data. I think at the beginning of the cyber attack, again, we lost all the repair system. We weren't able to raise repairs initially, so there was a lot of work around putting interim solutions in, using Google Sheets, raising repairs through that process. But also a lot of work with the teams to understand what impact that was having on delivery as well. And as a result of that, we were able to put in place relatively quickly a system that, albeit very labour intensive, enabled us to raise repairs and continue to particularly do emergency and urgent repairs. I think we've now in a position with some recent developments as part of the Modern Tools for Housing. We've put in a permanent solution called the Repairs Hub, which allows us to raise repairs, link to the contact centre, and following the lifting of restrictions nationally, we went back into delivering full service. It does say in June there, it was actually the 19th of July. Just going back to the question earlier around the 1.2 million loss on housing repairs, that is actually the way the housing repairs and building maintenance budgets are calculated. We work on equivalent of £100,000 to £120,000 per operative of, in essence, income that they would deliver. So the total cost of the repairs that they would carry out if they were working as a private individual is in the region of £100,000 to £120,000. Now, as a result of stepping down from full service and just doing emergency repairs, actually that meant we weren't carrying out the whole of the service, so we didn't have the level of repairs coming into the service, but we still continued to pay those operatives, and a number of those operatives, particularly in the first lockdown, were deployed in other wider community support around delivering food parcels, etc. So that's where that 1.2 million loss is. In reality, it's a loss on paper in how we account, because we still paid the operatives but didn't undertake the work that was expected. So we're now, with those recent developments, able to get those repairs out. We have started monitoring some of the satisfaction tools, and I'll step onto that in a moment. And we have got a roadmap in place that develops all the additional functionality that we need around Repairs Hub to really make it a truly excellent system. We've got the plans, and we will get there. At this point in time now, like I said, we've got that in place. We're able to capture and close jobs data in real time. We're moving the out of hours service into Repairs Hub, which will make that a better delivery. And we're now able to monitor a fuller range of performance indicators, if not all of them. Again, I don't like slides like this generally with lots of little post-its on that you can't read the detail on, but it just goes to set out, obviously the yellow ones are what we've done, the green ones are where we're working at the minute, the blue ones are where we've got plans in place and timeframes for, the red ones are the ones that still need to be done but are in the later phase of the roadmap and recovery. One of the key performance indicators is customer satisfaction with repairs done first time. And it's been a real difficult one, because we've not been able to monitor it at all. We started being able to get some of that data back from July. So given this is Q1 position, it's saying there's no data in there. What I can say is, we were at 71%, 71.44% at the end of 2021, and 42%, sorry, 72% at the end of 1920, just before the pandemic. We have got that data for July, August and September, and it has dropped. Unsurprisingly, it's dropped, because we've had such a backlog of repairs, so satisfaction with us getting out there has impacted on that. But what we are seeing month on month is that improving. So in July it was 54% customer satisfaction, in August it was 57%, and in September it was 60%. So it's not where we want it to be, but it's going in the right direction. And as we get through a lot of the backlog of repairs, and especially as we develop the functionality of Repairs Hub, we will get back to that position. And I'll be honest, I'm expecting us to not just get back, but to exceed that by quite a way. The second set of data around repairs here is actually from a system perspective, as to what we class as having completed first time. So the reality of what our data is telling us, and then the reality of what our customers think, whether we've completed it or not. And it's really important to have those two, because customer experience and having our customers think we've done it is really important, because if they don't think we've completed a repair, there's either we've got something wrong, or there's a breakdown in communication that just results in failure demand and contact into the system that we don't really need. We are the next phase of the recovery programme is the rollout of mobile technology to the trades operatives again, so that they will get their jobs on a handheld device, and they'll be able to close a handheld device. And as a result of that, we'll get that data. We're hoping we're in the final stages of the development and testing of that will go live towards the end of October, possibly the first week in November. So again, when we come to the end of Q3, we will have some data for that, but hopefully we'll have, in the same way as I've got some updates from Q2, we'll be able to feed that in. In relation to, do you want me to stop there, Chair? With any questions on the?
Yes, I have one question from Councillor Gregory. Do you want to come in on this part of the presentation?
Yes, thank you. On the repairs matters, I just wanted to know what, I presume the longer term aim is to reduce the volume of repair work. So I wondered what we were doing in terms of regular messaging and advice to our tenants about how to do some minimal kind of maintenance work themselves. For example, are we producing self-help videos for them? How are we empowering them to put in measures which are preventative? So, for example, when the Decent Homes work was done a few years ago, all these kitchens and bathrooms were installed, but there were no things like plug catchers. So one of our big areas of repair work is blockages and drains. So I just think I wonder what we're doing to look at a longer term strategy. You know, can't just keep repairing. We need to see some sort of change as things are going to get a lot harder in terms of finding people to do the work. So is there a strategy for empowering people and for somehow analysing the type of repairs and reducing the need for some of those repairs? I mean, obviously some are specialists, but there are some things that if tenants were able to do more preventative work, could see a reduction in our costs in the longer term. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Michelle. I've got Councillor Smith. If Gilbert, you want to come in, and then we'll ask Steve Waddington to reply to both.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Michelle on this, and I do think that there are certain aspects where the residents need to take a bit of responsibility for some of the repairs. But just on that kind of point, just looking at general maintenance kind of going forward, because obviously, you know, buildings deteriorate with the weather; they just weather all the time. So we need part of the budget that's just consistent with that going forward. Is that the case? In other words, you know, have we got a ring-fence budget for those kind of repairs? You know, how much firefighting do we do as compared to the sort of constant and ongoing kind of upkeep of our stock? I hope that makes sense.
Yep. Okay. Steve, do you want to try and attempt those?
With regards to the first question around a preventative approach and encouraging residents to take responsibility for those. To be honest, I'm not sure if we do have that. It's not something that I'm aware of. I will plead that being the new boy here. I am 12 weeks in now, but that's not something that's been brought to my attention. So I'm not sure whether we do have that. I agree. A preventative approach is really important, and one of the things that we're developing through the modern tools for housing, particularly around legal disrepair cases where we have a significant number of legal disrepairs, is understanding what has happened and what has presented for those properties in the 12 months prior to that case coming forward as a legal disrepair, so that we can preempt and try and take that preventative action so that we're stopping those cases coming forward. I think it is a really important point as to where you have the cut-off between what residents are expected to take responsibility for themselves and what, as a service, we will do. And that's certainly something I've looked at in previous authorities, and it always proves to be contentious, particularly with residents and towers. But it's something I will look at and see where we are with it for the future. With regards to the longer term plan around investment, we have the Housing Revenue Account Business Plan, which is a legal requirement for us to set that out on a 30-year basis and have a detailed 5-year plan. So the investment on a responsive repairs element is built into that over those first 5 years, and then a notional amount going forward. What we also do build into that is linked to the capital investment. We have a 7-year capital investment strategy, where funding is allocated notionally to each property. So in essence, each property has an amount allocated to it each 7 years. And obviously, as we manage the capital programme moving forward, we then undertake the surveys, determine what's necessary work. Doesn't mean every property will always get the full amount that's allocated to it spent on. Some will have more, some will have less. But it's that dynamic approach to understanding how we invest in properties moving forward. There's a lot of work that does need to be done around the housing revenue account business plan, particularly as mentioned here earlier, around the risks around climate change, and especially the plans and challenges to get to carbon net zero. For 23,000 council house stock and 10,000 leaseholders is not is going to be no mean feat, but that's something we are looking at.
Great, thanks very much. I'm just conscious of the time. I think
I will scoot through
move
quickly.
on.
Moving on to rent, very similar position to repairs. We lost all the data, had no visibility of accounts, balances, understanding whether people were paying. We quickly put in place interim solutions, Google Sheets, to enable us to do that, to be able to enable us to balance and understand what we thought the rent account position was. I think, unfortunately, we have seen a significant number of residents who, from the beginning of the pandemic, as well as the beginning of the cyber attack, have just paid no rent, and that is having a real impact. Obviously, the council, as a lot of other local authorities and landlords did through the pandemic, made a conscious decision not to pursue enforcement action, especially at a time when we knew residents were suffering financially through loss of earnings, lack of loss of jobs. You'd also got the impact that nationally there was a block on being able to take cases through the courts for possession. That in itself has had a real impact on our ability to collect debt. We're now in the position where we've got the system in place. The 2nd of August, the enforcement and escalation policy was put back in place. As a result of that, the process that we managed, contacting tenants, ringing them, sending them letters, sending them texts, visiting them, that has all started, and there's thousands of text and messages and letters gone out. The first batch of notice seeking possessions, which is the first legal stage of taking a tenant to court to gain possession, doesn't necessarily mean we will, but it's the first legal stage. Those have started again, and just under 350 have been issued since the beginning of August. We now have the interim IT solution back in place that takes us back to where we were pre-cyber attack. We were hopeful to have that in operation a few weeks ago. It actually went live this week, so the staff are now utilising that. What I've also done as well, in working with ICT, Rob Miller, who was on the call as well, is we're taking not a slight pause, but just a review of our approach around the modern tools for housing with rent arrears, to actually see is that strategy still the correct strategy to continue developing that and understanding how long it will take us to develop it and the risks, or are we at the point where, because of the significant level of increase in rent arrears, it's most appropriate for us to buy a best-in-class package that will give us the functionality straight away from day one. So we're just managing and understanding that position at the moment. It doesn't say we will or we won't, but we're just balancing that. I'll skip over that slide because of time. Just looking at this one again, it's just to show you where the rent arrears balances are. It actually shows that the vast majority of residents that are in arrears are under £2,000 rent arrears, but we do have some very high level of rent arrears, upwards towards £20,000 for people that have just not paid and they've got debt in advance before. The graph, the bar chart on the left, just shows the activity that's happened as well. So looking at the actual rent position, At the end, before the pandemic, we were at just over 5 million. At the end of Q1, it was 12.349 million. So a significant increase in rent arrears. And let's say the pandemic and the cyber attack has really impacted on our ability to collect that and not having the systems. We have seen a significant increase in the number of claimants on universal credit. That has tripled, I'm told, over the time scale of the pandemic. I think it was just under 2,000 or 1,700 at the beginning of the pandemic, and now just under 5,000 on universal credit. So again, we're looking to see what the impact of the withdrawal of the £20 top-up is going to have on that as well. We also have, and I think it was mentioned earlier that Ian Williams mentioned around working with our revenues and benefits colleagues around accessing and understanding the housing benefit position. We do have approximately 300 accounts that have been set up, tenancies that have been set up for housing benefit since October 2020, and we're close to a position of understanding what the benefits back payment may be in relation to those, and also another 200 that were created between July 20 and the cyber attack. I think there was a question earlier around the impact of a potential upwards of 4% rent increase, and that is quite significant. Obviously, our average rent is about £104 this year, so a 4% increase is going to be just over £4 a week increase. I think what I would say is, that is the strategy that we've got in place. If we don't take that, then we never make that money back up. It's the same as when the government put in place the 1% rent reduction for 4 years. It's not just the impact in that 1 year, it's the cumulative impact over future years and the impact on the housing revenue account business plan. We do recognise, and obviously I'm talking a lot with Councillor Mackenzie as the Cabinet member around that. Actually, 50% of our rental income comes through housing benefits and universal credit, and that's for approximately 60% of our tenants. So whilst if we had that level of rent increase, it would have an impact, but not taking that level of rent increase actually would have a significant benefit to the Treasury rather than to Hackney and Hackney residents. But 60% of our residents are in receipt of benefit, housing benefit or universal credit, so they will see that rent increase covered by that benefit. Housing finance system, I'll very quickly over this. This is just setting out the structure of how we're managing it, making sure the priorities we've got around dealing with tenants, down the left-hand side, leaseholders, temporary accommodation, the calculations around annual increases, weekly rents, and then we're working top to bottom from down the left-hand side and left to right across the top around priorities around longer-term development of the finance system. Very quickly on voids, this committee looks at the average time to re-let voids. Again, if we don't re-let voids, we lose rental income. It also has a big impact on our ability to meet housing needs and particularly support people in temporary accommodation. Again, with the cyber attack impacted the way it did in the other areas. We lost all our data. We're now developing, we've got that data back. I think if I move on to the next slide, you can see, again, information, you'll not be able to see the detail, but we've got the dashboard that understands the number of properties, how many with the DLO, how many with contractors, how many major works, minor works. The performance data at the end of Q1 was an average turnaround time of 113 days compared to 55 days pre-pandemic. Voids is something that's close to my heart, having managed voids for many times, and I'm used to a much swifter turnaround of voids than this. And I think there's a number of things that we are putting in place and that I've put in place already. What we have seen at the end of September is that 113 has come down to 103, but importantly, the in-month turnaround time for September was just over 80 days. So again, we're going in the right direction. There should have been an extra slide that I'm not sure what's happened to around the impact on the housing revenue account. I've mentioned the 120,000, sorry, 1.2 million. Obviously, increased level of rent arrears has an impact on the viability. We need to have a greater level of provision for bad debt. But we have got, as Ian mentioned, £1.6 million savings. We're close to £2 million savings that are on the table for Councillor Mackenzie to consider. And with the potential for the rent increase, that would give us an ability to have a balanced budget moving into next year. And what we've agreed with our finance colleagues is that we will bring forward the full review of the housing revenue account business plan so that we can really reset that. There was one final question, I think, Councillor across the room mentioned about the impact on the repairs revenue contribution to capital and of not carrying out those repairs. Not all of the revenue contribution to capital has been used to back up and to impact on the budget as a result of COVID and the cyber attack. Some of it has been used. We will still use some of that to bring repairs forward and improvements forward. But I think the reality is, actually, even if we wanted to catch up that 18 months, the industry is not in a position to do that. You know, there's a lot of repairs and trade operatives being lost through the pandemic, and there's a lot of contractors that are struggling. So actually talking to the industry, we will bring some of those forward, but the reality is we've lost 18 months. It's not about cancelling any capital schemes. It's just we've lost 18 months, and then we will start and carry on moving forward. I'll stop there. And
right, thanks very much, Steve. Any questions? Yes, I've got one from Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for that. I mean, I'm really excited about the repairs hub because I think that's just going to be sort of pull all the information into one place, and you know, I hope that members can sort of have sight of that as well. Be useful. But just on, I just want to kind of, I'm a bit confused about the rent situation, so just forgive me. So the HRA account, we've lost 2.5 million in rents. Correct? Is that correct? I think that's correct. That's what you said at the start, Ian Williams. So, and then we've got £12 million in rent arrears. So the one question is, what is the difference? And the next question is, I believe you said that, was it 50% of tenants are on housing benefit and 60% of tenants are on housing benefit and universal credit. So my question is, what proportion of the rent arrears, that 12 million, are on housing benefit and or universal credit? Does that make sense?
yeah, I'll come to the second question first, if I can. Maybe it wasn't as clear. 50% of the total rental income that we receive comes through housing benefit, but that is from 60% of our tenants. So 60% of tenants are in receipt of full or part housing benefit or universal credit housing payment. So the total rent roll for us is about 135 million. So 50% of that comes through housing benefit. And like I say, that affects 60% of people. I'm a little bit confused on the first question around the 2.5 million loss.
Let's just focus on this question for a second. The question was, what percentage of the £12 million arrears, percentage of people are on housing benefit of that £12 million arrears? Do we know that figure? How many of those people who owe money are on housing benefit?
We do know. Unfortunately, I've not got all of that data here. I think we do. That would
be a useful figure to know.
I've got one figure here, but this is just for universal credit, not for the people that are in receipt of housing benefit. So of the 4,683 claimants that we've got on universal credit, 3,153 of them are in arrears, and those arrears total 5.8 million. Now, I haven't got the figure here, but I can get the figure for you as to what the number of tenants are that are on housing benefit and how many of those are in arrears.
Yeah, it's kind of the percentage of the 12 million are on housing benefit. Yeah. Does that
Okay,
make
I think
sense?
we've gone as far as we can, Gilbert. But I think Steve's reassurance that he will have a look at that and share that, because it's a key issue. And I'm particularly worried, is our debt carrying on going up at the moment? We've hit 12, is it still increasing?
It is, unfortunately.
Yeah, and particularly in light of the reduction in universal credit, we might expect to see a further pressure on that. Notwithstanding our improved performance, hopefully both in collection and in people's capacity to pay.
I think, yes, rent arrears are continuing to increase since Q1. We are aware of the £20 reduction in universal credit, the end of furlough at the end of September. But I think we now have a system, like I said, that has been back in place from the beginning of this week, that enables us to actively monitor and manage. And then, as we said, it's surprising, once you start that escalation process, it does prompt people to pay. And, it will take a while for the arrears to come down, but actually it's about spending the arrears, getting the rent in, and then actually recovering the arrears as well.
Okay, thanks. Again, I mean, I think we really need to keep a very close eye on this, and I suggest that, again, we may need to see you again in January, given how important this issue is and how we're still in a very intermediate position. So, can we thank you, Steve? And apologies, Councillor Odds.
I didn't say anything before, but excuse me for being pedantic, as is my wont. But I really must ask that when we refer to universal credit, we do not say a reduction in the universal credit. We refer to it correctly as the removal of the temporary uplift to universal credit, because there is a vast difference.
There may be a vast difference in its origin. Its effect is, though, to reduce people's income. And that confronts them with a problem. So I don't want to go into the politics of it, because you're right, that's not the issue here. It's whether people are able to pay their rents. Okay, thanks very much for that. I've got two further points. I've got Councillor Gregory and Councillor McMahon. Anthony, do you want to come in first?
Thanks very much, Chair. It was just a quick one, following off the back of that. I'm just interesting to know if the quantum of accounts that are in arrears is also continuing to increase. It's a kind of fine point, but obviously the amount of rent in arrears is going up. I just wondered if we're also noticing, and if we've got sight of whether the number of people that are falling behind or stopping paying their rent is continuing to increase as well. And if we do have sight of that, we're able to sort of factor that in managing the situation.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. It's my question about, is it still going up? Because I think it goes to your exact point. Is the system yet under control? And clearly it's not yet, is the answer I'm hearing, both from Ian Williams and from Steve. So I think, unfortunately, we are continuing to see that. Hence why I think we need to keep a close eye on this and see a report, as you said. So I do agree with that. Councillor Gregory.
No, my hand wasn't up. So.
Oh, it wasn't. I'm misinformed. Okay, Anthony, are you happy with that? I mean, we will want to see that, because I think that's a very good indication of how stable the system is, whether it's going the right direction. Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm just very conscious that some key issues have been raised, but we are now being pressed for time. Can we then go on to item 8, which is the Chief Executive's department report, risk report? And I'm very pleased to see two things. One is that Mark Carroll has put himself forward in his second week, though he's well supported, I think, by his colleagues in addressing this. The other thing I just wanted to say, I'm very pleased to see in it that the regeneration has been brought together as a unit. It's previously been one of my bugbears that many aspects of regeneration have been spread over different departments, different units, and therefore we've never had a consistent approach to risk and performance in this area. So I think this represents a step forward. I've still got some comments on what's there, but I'm pleased to say that it is in one place. So Mark, do you want to come in and just sort of introduce it?
So thanks very much. And I introduced myself very briefly right at the beginning at your invitation, but I would, this has been a brilliant part of induction for me, in truth. I've been very impressed with the forensic nature of the questions and the challenge that you've given us and holding our feet to the fire. But also, I think all of you will appreciate just how strong the response has been from officers, both new officers who are new to the service and bringing new insights in, as well as very established officers. So I found that very helpful. And I think that dual role, if I may, just for a second more, I know we're delayed, but of really holding our feet to the fire, but also provoking us to think differently about some things. I think Councillor Gregory's question about how we supporting residents to be able to tenants to do more for themselves, supported by Councillor Smith and others, I think is really helpful to us, because I think we'll take that away and think more about how do we really do it. So I think both hold us to fire for what we're doing, but also act as a bit of a provocateur for us about how else we ought to be doing things. I think it's really valuable. So I hope I will continue to come and continue to be invited. On Chief Executive Directorate specifically, as you say, I've got very able colleagues who will speak to individual items, and I won't rehearse that. I think my observations, and I'm glad you welcomed, Chair, to bring together things that obviously happened under my predecessor on regeneration particularly. I think we will want to do a little bit of work. I think this is probably true across the corporate governance more generally and our risk register more generally, just about making sure we're really clear about what the risks to the council are. It's given the nature of what's happening in the country at the moment, it's quite easy to describe risks that are real risks and real issues, but we've got to really, I think, focus on and what does that then mean for the council, and are they reputational risks, are they legal risks, are they risks to our delivery? So really trying to draw that out, I think, as sharply as we can. So we'll do more work, and we'll keep working together, I think, on pulling that up. I don't think that there's very much else to say. I noted all the way through, and it's in your corporate register, that actually the frequency of looking at the risk register means that they do remain fairly static, from report to report. But there is something about just making sure that we all collectively are really focused on hitting our targets. So thinking about whether the actions we're taking are really moving us on. It would feel uncomfortable if we stayed with risk staying at the same level for very long periods of time. There's something, either we've not quite captured the risk properly, or we've not quite captured our actions properly, if we're just reporting status quo after each one. But that's my general comments, and that it does apply to the Chief Executive Directorate, but it applies more broadly, and we'll work together with you on refining that. Having said that, I should probably hand over then to individual strategic directors and directors to take us through individual elements. Do you want to be talked through the risks given the timing, or would you rather take them and then just ask us questions, and then the relevant people will respond to your questions?
I think the second, Mark. I mean, just to say, I would very much welcome the the sort of open approach to this. And I mean, my commentary on the economic thing is that we haven't distinguished that key point that you just made about what is an external risk and what's under the control of the council in this layout. And I think that then means that we get into this difficult position of seeing risks just carrying on, because the external risk that we can't affect goes on, but we don't seem to be, we can't then distinguish it from whether we're adequately addressing the internal, the things that we can control around the risk. And I think it would be very helpful for us to be able to distinguish those and then address the key point that you've made, that if there are long-term risks, why are they there, and are we doing enough to address them? I think it's a very pertinent question. So yes, helpful to have Stephen Haynes' view on where we go from here, because I think this is it's a strange mixture here of and there are a lot of blank sheets here. So I see this very much as a first draft, and I welcome Mark Carroll's commitment, I guess, with you to try and refine this process so that we get a sort of more consistent picture on the economic and regeneration risk. But I don't know if you want to just say anything around that.
I suppose, Chair, what I'd say is I concur with that completely, and I think that we also see this as an evolution of a work in progress. As you said at the beginning, I'm now responsible for a range of services which includes housing regeneration and area regeneration. We're incredibly keen to ensure that there's that join up, as you know, from the State Commission work. I also see that being very pertinent here. I can talk through the general risks, or I can take questions. It's just worth saying that Mark's directorate is split into 3 areas, mine, colleagues and Dawn. So the first section of mine, just happy to take any questions of Colin and address them as we go.
Yeah, no, I think let's take you in order, and yeah, very much I want to take questions rather than going through it, not least because none of these are at the moment in the red on the economic side. So unless people have got, yeah, no, I've got Michelle wanting to come in on this particular section, and then we can go to your colleagues, other colleagues. So Michelle, do you want to ask on the regeneration side?
Oh no, I don't know if this comes under regeneration. Perhaps it doesn't. I just wanted to ask about the energy company that we were going to set up. Did we ever set it up? And I'm assuming we didn't, but I just wasn't sure. It's not part of the regeneration.
Yes, this is off subject, but can you do a quick response on that, just where it's located and whether we've got a tick on it?
In simple terms, we have set up a company, Hackney Light and Power. It's supporting the work around solar panels. But it's within the F&R risk register. I suspect, Gregory, that's where we pick that up.
Okay, so I'm not hearing any other. Oh, Gilbert, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Chair, I'm just looking at the risk register. It's the building safety 1 CE EPNH 005, new building safety legislation. Can we just speak about, because it's indicated as being, you know, a substantial risk here. This continues to be a risk with emerging legislation yet to be fully embedded into working practices. So the question is, when is that legislation out, and when will it be fully embedded into working practices?
No, I mean, I think this is a very good illustration of this issue that Mark Carroll referred to, how much is under our control. Are we doing everything we can to mitigate a risk, a very high risk, which we can't control, which is what standards are going to be applied?
It's a hugely important issue, Chair, as we know. James is on the call. James is a colleague of mine, in Director of Regeneration, who can speak to this. I think we can do a lot, actually, and we have to do a lot, but James can fill in the gaps. James,
Well, it'd be good to have that in future, because I didn't pick that up from this. I took the fact that it was all on the legislation side, but if it isn't, then I think we need to unpick this if members are going to be able to hold the accountability. Yeah, James, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. briefly, the actual risk indicator, as indicated by Stephen and the Chief Executive, it's a complicated one, Chair, because it's got a bunch of factors in there. So yes, there's legislation around buildings, but there's also what are we doing on a day-to-day basis, for example, about our private sector stock that already exists. So I could spend the next 2 hours talking about all of these. I won't do.
No.
But I think what we'll do is give you a quick update outside on the particular components of that particular indicator. Suffice to say, the current focus is on the regeneration program itself, the stuff that we build, the stuff that we have under control. It combines both fire safety also with net zero. So that's that degree of complexity. And the second area of huge focus is how we work with our private sector owners and landlords in Hackney to tackle the fire safety issues. Private sector housing team, very briefly, we're aware of about 250 blocks that we've surveyed in Hackney that are within scope. At the moment, we are concentrating on 3 of those blocks with one particular issue. Of course, the indicator is high impact. That's why it's up there in the red, because if something goes wrong, obviously people can lose their lives. But as Mark has said, we're going to have to refine and finesse this indicator a bit more. But I'm happy to bring that back here to audit to work with you on how we do that.
That would be very helpful, James, and I do think it's very important we do it, and you've made an excellent case for it, so that we do have visibility of where the risks lie on this. So please, that would be very important. Okay, right, does that move us on?
Chair, sorry, could I just make one more quick point?
Yeah, sure.
If it's okay, and you'll notice on the risk register, we highlighted transition work with the LDC. Something that I know is very close to your heart, Chair. I'm wanting to socialise this more across the organisation with members and more widely, because as you'll be aware, this is a long-term process, but hugely important in terms, as Mark said at the beginning, in terms of how important it is for us, our strategic priorities, and I'm trying to find the best place to place this for oversight and for input from members. Obviously not for now, but that's the reason that's particularly on there at the moment. Because it's of its significance, as I say, in the medium and long term.
I mean, I think given that on the normal programme we wouldn't come back to this for quite a time, I do think there's a case for around the regeneration and homes function of having an update, a new version of this that addresses the sort of points that we've been making. So if you could work with Mark on producing something for us as a first draft. Great. Okay. Right. Other elements. Do we go to Polly Chop first? Is that? Are you on the call, Polly?
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Right. Any remarks you want to make? Just sort of overall ones on areas. I mean, we've talked about some of the issues around workforce, which I think fall within partly your area. And the risks associated with it. Are any points you want to sort of particularly highlight in this?
Just to say, I think that I mean there are 2 sort of chief risks highlighted here in my directorate. One is around sort of community engagement, and the other is around workforce. And I think the primary risk for us at the moment is around the workforce piece. We talked about it as you know, quite extensively in the previous meeting. Just to say, in terms of an update on that, we have started to roll out the hybrid working training to managers. We've done about 65 managers now, had incredibly positive feedback from managers about how it is going to help them manage the challenge of the next phase of bringing people back into the workplace, how we manage that slightly weird world, which isn't the one we were used to before 2020, but also isn't everybody staying at home all the time, which there are, significant risks attached to. We now have to quickly step that up in terms of trying to roll that out across the organisation. So we have made a start there. I think what's really welcome is the massive emphasis the new Chief Exec is putting on workforce and staff development, and I think that will mean that we should be able to progress these programmes quite quickly. So I'd like to think that by the time we come back to you in January, I'll be able to give you a much more substantial update on how we're getting with this stuff.
Great. No, it's very helpful, Polly. Yeah, I mean, I think you've seized on the key issue that's worrying us all about this. But can I make the same remarks about this kind of layout in terms as a sort of risk? The presentation to us, it needs to be made more consistent, I think. So I think that the whole Chief Executive Department has got to have a common view about how we lay these risks out, how we define them and control them and say how we're going. So I think that applies to your area as well. Then finally on legal and government services, I don't know, any points are you going to make?
Not me. I think that Andrew Stratton making some points.
Oh,
Hi, Chair. So obviously, Dawn.
Oh, you're taking the rap, are you?
Yeah. Dawn had to give our apologies for this meeting, as you know. I'm quite happy to speak to some of the governance ones. If there are some general questions about the legal ones, I can take those away and provide a written response for the committee if needed. I think the key ones to just highlight are potentially around some of the outcomes of the cyber attack in terms of case management. There's some clear ones in there as well. You'll see about the return to physical meetings, and you'll be well aware that we've been doing quite a bit of work around that to ensure that we're able to offer a consistent live stream and ensure that members are able to participate in the different ways that they wish to, even if we don't have the legislation in place to enable us to do that entirely as members might wish. Beyond that, I think there's just a few standing ones with regards to directorates and services failing to seek timely advice either on governance or legal matters, and obviously we have a continued sort of engagement and client management program that sits under our primary activities, and certainly from a governance perspective, I quite regularly produce workshops and various other bits and pieces for services across the council. So we've stepped up quite a bit of that engagement over the last few months.
Okay, thanks very much. I mean, I make the same remark here. We've added a couple of risks here around essentially resource and workforce and morale here, and which has no clear definition of mitigation. So same remark, and it's in the red. Now I think it overlaps, hopefully, with what Polly was raising about workforce and training and support. So I imagine it's covered by that. But again, I think this whole report needs a kind of a good look over in terms of being able to define the risks, take them apart in terms of where their origins are, i.e. external or internal, and what mitigation measures. So I think we need to do it in all the areas, and I'm sure, Mark, you'll be committed to doing that. Okay, I've got Councillor Smythe on it. Yep, go ahead, Gilbert.
Yes, Chair, just on the risks, it would be kind of useful as well for members to understand the kind of methodology behind how the risks are being assessed in terms of, is there a scoring mechanism there? How does it work? It'd just be useful for members to understand how that works. I don't know if that could just be noted in the minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, no, we have had, I mean, it's absolutely key issue you raised. How we define that sort of approach of sort of impact versus likelihood is a key. And we have had a number of presentations on this, and members, it might be worth recirculating that so that members are clear about the methodology that we use. So that is certainly one issue, but I think the other issue is that we need a consistent way in which the presentation of these risks is done. So, Mark, if you can pick that up in terms of working with colleagues on that, and we can have a version before that. And you're always very welcome to this committee, in answer to one of the points you made in the introduction. Oh, sorry, you've got one. Yeah, AJ.
Yeah, you raised earlier about staff sicknesses increasing. Was there kind of an outcome? Because on page 110, it's talking about decreasing staff morale, ill health, and so on. So we had that earlier in the register, didn't we? You raised it about staff illnesses.
Yeah, I don't know, Mark. Do you want to respond to that in how that's being addressed?
Well, so you'll understand that Hackney, like many other local authorities has felt itself under real pressure during this period, from staff working, carrying on going into locations and carrying on working and delivering services that people really depend on, as well as those changes in working from home for those staff that were doing that. So I think there's a general uptick across local government about that. But we also know there are some issues that we need to understand more in Hackney. So generally things like time off for flu and colds has reduced in the population as a whole. So we just want to understand exactly what's happening in Hackney over this period. I mean, when we're coming back on some of the chief exec's directorate things, that was on the corporate one. So we'll just update you on the actions we're taking. Individual group directors are looking at their own individual performance and numbers at the moment. So when we're next back, I think we'll pick up the corporate risk register through that.
Yeah, no, I think, and you will have received the concern members have about this, which you've clearly indicated you share. So I'm certainly reassured on that point.
Probably just sorry to interrupt, but just to be on the record, I share that concern on two levels. One is I share it in relation to our staff. So if we have a number of people who are feeling who aren't able to perform their duties because of sickness, then we ought to be very concerned about them as individuals. And then obviously the financial and service implications of having significant numbers of staff away because of sickness. So I think we want to focus on this for both of those reasons.
Yeah, no, very good. I think we share those concerns. Good. I'm just acutely conscious I've kept you here now for two and a bit hours, and very anxious to try and keep going. I don't know, Ian, in presenting the next item, which is finance and corporate resources, much of it has been covered in our previous presentations, but perhaps you can pick out any areas that have not been covered.
What's in here, Chair? To be honest, a lot of the issues have already been picked up, so I'd say given time and the other substantive items that are on here, particularly the deep dive work we need to do, I've suggested set out.
Colleagues, any points that you feel have not been addressed in Ian's earlier contributions? I mean, I'm just looking at things like budget stability, accounts closure. These are all the ones that we've highlighted, management of capital programs. They're all ones we have covered earlier, but if there are some you feel have not been covered, please do indicate and we'll press on those. I'm not seeing any questions, so I think we'll take that as read and move on. Not the way I like to deal with it, but as I say, you've had a good whack of the meeting, so I don't feel too bad about it. Right, we then move on. Michael Sheffield's report, audit and anti-fraud progress report. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report that you see regularly, so I'm just going to focus on the key issues that I think there are at the moment. What I would highlight is that there is a smaller number of audits that are in progress or have been completed at this stage of the year than is usually the case. And I'll let you know the reasons for that and what we're doing about it. So first of all, when we agreed the plan this year, we were mindful of the impact of the pandemic and the cyber attack on services across the council, and we had a smaller plan to begin with because of that, and there was a contingency built in to allow us to pick up issues that we expected to come up through the year. We expected more of that than would usually be the case. So we started with a smaller number of audits. We also carried forward a higher number of audit work that was in progress from the previous year, because as you'll recall, most of the team was redeployed for large parts of last year. So there was more work already in play at the start of the financial year, which impacted things as well. The biggest issue that we currently have is the fallout from the cyber attack. It is causing services real difficulty to engage with the audit process. There are temporary data solutions in place and temporary processes related to those. So it is not the best use of audit time to audit something that is a temporary setup that is going to change, where quite often the service may know that there are issues, but they are doing their best to address them. So it's difficult to get that engagement, and understandably, I think, in a lot of places. And that, of course, is on top of a reduced audit plan being carried out last year because of the pandemic primarily, and the cyber attack as well last year. So in terms of what we're doing about that, we are of course engaging with directorate management teams. We are reporting back on the audit work that has been able to be carried out, making sure that people are aware of the ongoing problems that we have and getting support for that wherever it is possible to do so. We're also engaging with service heads where audit work is scheduled, and understanding and adapting the scope of audit work, and you know, in places we've swapped an audit out and brought something in to replace it. So trying to be as accommodating as we can within reason. And the other thing that we're doing, of course, is keeping that liaison going with ICT to understand as new solutions are brought in and as old systems are able to be recovered, so that we're aware of what we can actually bring back into play as that becomes possible. So that's the issues that we have. In terms of the outcome from that reduced level of work, it's certainly within the boundaries of what we've found previously in terms of the limited or the no assurance audits. There is not a higher preponderance of those than there has been in the past. But of course, we have to acknowledge the fact that an audit can't be carried out is a cause for concern of itself. So that, I think, and where recommendations are raised, they are continuing to be implemented by services at the same high level that we are used to. So that, again, is a positive. In terms of investigations, it's, as you'd expect, referrals are down on what we're historically used to, but they're coming back up from where they were a year ago. In terms of the NFI, well, we're impacted there because we weren't able to provide data because that was at the time of the cyber attack. So the information wasn't there, wasn't reliable. It would have been a wasted exercise to insist on all of that going in. We matched what we could. But there are some reliable signs that some of that key work that you're used to hearing about, particularly on the tenancy side, is coming back up. The numbers of outcomes there are increasing. We've got people back out on the streets, knocking on doors, doing that part of the job that follows through to results later on. So I'm happy that there's some steady progress on that side.
Very good.
And at that point, I'll take any questions that there might be.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, can I just say in introducing, see Gilbert's got a question. I mean, clearly we paid a price in terms of our internal audit and oversight work. But I'm vastly reassured that despite all the pressures of cyber attack and COVID, that we've managed to maintain a basic internal audit service throughout. One, I think that's a real achievement, and secondly, I think it pays tribute to the culture of Hackney that I've not seen any substantial causes of concern. In other words, breakdown of internal systems that we might have seen. So I think you've performed a very useful reassurance, certainly to us, that there has been a basic corporate compliance with policy and process. So I think it's a tribute to Hackney officers as well as the work you've done. Gilbert, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the report 6.2, Appendix 1, the Council's target for 2021-22 is 90% of high priority recommendations. Audit has followed up 75 high priority recommendations, and that current rate stands at 84% fully implemented, with a further 15% partially implemented. I'm just wondering when that 15% would be completed.
So every audit recommendation that is raised has a time scale that goes along with it. That is subject to change, so if there's more problems that the auditee encounters in realising that recommendation, we might push it out, but it is monitored. There's a time to measure it again. We do chase on those, not least when audit committees coming up. We make sure that we get the most accurate information that we can for you. So it's a live, ongoing process to keep on top of those recommendations.
Thank you for that. Councillor Rhodes.
Yeah, on page 169, you've got analysis and outcomes. You've got a table there which gives the 2021-22 to date, which is a 6-month period. Then it gives 2020-21. Is that also a 6-month period, or is that a whole year figure? Because if it's a whole year figure, we seem to have considerably more things happening under parking and blue badges than there were last year. And I'm wondering why that is. And also I realise why the figures for legal action to recover tenancy in progress last year are not available. It's obviously due to the cyber attack. But those 87 where there's legal action to recover tenancy this year, are those cases resulting in people being made homeless? And if so, is the council going to rehouse them?
So in terms of the legal action to recover, the only relates to cases where we have investigated fraud. So it's a case of somebody has been subletting their home and we would look to end the tenancy in those circumstances. Even when there was the government moratorium on ending tenancies last year, there were exceptions to that, and the case of fraud was one of those. If someone is subletting their home, they obviously have somewhere else to live anyway. And in terms of the subtenant that would be at the address, depending on circumstances, they would have recourse to come to Hackney and get help, but they would be going through the proper process and be treated fairly along with everybody else that's on the waiting list. In terms of that 87 figure for the legal action in progress, the reason that there's not a number against 2021 is because it's not carryover, it's just a number at a point in time. And with regard to the parking numbers, you're right, they are higher. That's partly, I think, a consequence that abuse last year while everybody was at home and not going to the shops and using someone else's blue badge to park up. It's also a consequence that while the team has had to put some aspects of the work on pause, for example, knocking on doors and going into people's homes was not an option while there was a lockdown. Working on street was, and so it was shifting those. It was shifting the resources to do what we could when we could.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Chair, just Michael's too modest to reference it, I think, in this report, but I'll also remember that the audit team, significant numbers were redeployed to assist the business grant processing team. So what I undertook as a sort of judgment call, really, particularly as we were paying out more and more business grants, and the significant number of that, in the end, total £100 million. So I was really keen to make sure that as that new risk, that new challenge for us emerged, we put in place and refocused our governance and audit resources in a place where actually we were dealing with significant sums of public money. So that's the other side of the coin as well. It needs to be referenced.
Great, thanks very much for that. Yeah, AJ.
Ian's kind of answered it. So these on 4.4, all these deferred audits, I mean, when's the cycle normally? I mean, will they be done within the next year, like direct payments, public financial health control?
Yes, all audits are not being cancelled, they are being postponed. Obviously, we are influenced in that by the availability of information sources, by stresses on services, by sometimes changes to services, which means it's no longer appropriate to look at something that was in the plan, and we will adapt and look at what is relevant, but they're postponements, not cancellations.
Okay, thanks very much. So should we note this report and thank Michael about his section. Excellent. And nearly last, Poor old Treasury management. Do we? How do you want to report this, Ian?
Pradeep's sort of been with us.
Oh, you loyal thing.
We promise to bring him forwards in future.
Do you want to highlight any points?
Sorry, I'm just back here.
Yeah. Any points you want to highlight, particularly in light, I guess, of a prospective turmoil in the financial markets if interest rates go up, was one issue that I was interested in your view.
So looking at the market, Chair, so I think what we're thinking, the interest rates are likely to go up in Q2 next year. That's what we think, and I think I think that it's just the knock-on effect of increase. It depends, what the Bank of England, what they do. I think the next MPC meeting, which is on the 4th of November, will be quite key, considering like an increase in inflation, how they see things, going, with the household pressures, in terms of the spendings. So I think we think that the rates are going to go up in Q2 next year, and there will be a knock-on effect on the gilt yields going up, because the investors are looking at the increase. They are thinking like the interest rates will go, and they are also considering the inflation expectations. So I think that's a knock-on effect. That's what we are keeping an eye on regular basis and see what the impact will be on the investments and on the borrowing market.
Yeah, I mean, and our borrowing costs as well, clearly.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to highlight to us, Paddy, in terms of your report?
So in terms of report, Chair, just conscious of the time, so I'll just do a quick overview on the report. So the Treasury update for this audit committee is split in two parts. The first part is Appendix 1, which is basically just a summation of all the quarterly updates we do on a quarterly basis, in a final outturn, and also the Appendix 1 is just to confirm that we complied with all the prudential indicators and with the PM strategy that was approved by the cabinet and the audit committee last year. The second part is Appendix 2, which is basically a update on the Treasury activities from June to August, which is again in past. So that's the overview on the Treasury management update for this audit committee. And looking at the investments, I can confirm that the quality of our investments with our counterparties are within A+ and A-, which is again in compliance with the Treasury strategy for the council.
Excellent, thanks very much. Yeah, no, as I say, an area to keep an eye on, certainly. As particularly in light of what the Bank of England does. Great, thanks very much. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to try and rush us on, and moves us actually just to the final substantive item, the deep dive review, which I think in a sense stands on its own for members. I don't propose to press Jackie into summarising it, but just to make the point that this was a two-stage process that we agreed in to report it. So this is a formal report, if you like, from the deep dive exercise, which was specifically looked at ways that we were currently managing both the COVID and its return to work. And I think what we have really got some reassurance that, or we were reassured as a deep dive recommendation, which is in the report, which is basically we were reassured that the council has in place appropriate measures to cope with COVID recovery. However, the longer term issues that this raises in terms of new forms of service provision, that we clearly both want to take advantage of some of the opportunities, but also understand some of the longer term costs of that. That was seen as a second phase. We've got a final deep dive review at the end of November now, and I'm hoping that we can get a fuller report for our January meeting, and we can sign this deep dive off at that stage. So I'm trying to rush us, Jackie, but are there any additional points that you'd like to make from the excellent report? By the way, I think it summarises our work so far very well.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thanks, Chair.
So I'll just wait to see if there are questions. Yes, Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think this is really important work, obviously, and obviously, it's, it's very contemporary and very, of the moment. I mean, in terms of sort of the workforce strategy, the future workforce strategy going forward, where are we at the moment? Because we have recommendations, around sort of technology, hybrid working, extended partnership working, etc. But where are we at with that, and when are we going to kind of make a decision about where, what we're going to do?
Well, a question to be addressed, I think, to the Chief Executive, because I think our job was to investigate whether the council had in place mechanisms that properly reviewed and looked at the opportunities and the costs. And I think you've already heard that is very much under review from the point of view of the workplace. I think the other side of it, the workforce, sorry, as well as workplace, is the impact on services. And I'm thinking here particularly of the role of community provision, community support that we've seen during the pandemic, and which I think indicates the opportunity to relook at our service models. And I'm very much hoping that this next phase, both at the officer side and the executive, and the deep dive session that we have, will address the very questions that you've talked about. I don't anticipate all the decisions being made, but I think we do want to see that there is a process by which those opportunities and risks are being fully investigated and decisions taken over the next period. So I hope that's reassuring, and I hope Mark agrees with that as something he wants to see in terms of the overall organisation. And we will be looking at particular parts of it in the final deep dive session in November. Okay, any other points on that? I do think this is such a key moment in terms of coming out of COVID, that we don't just go back to business as usual, that we really think about those risks and opportunities a longer term. So I do see this as a very important bit of work that's important over the next couple of months, but it's not going to be resolved in that period. Okay, I'm on 9 o'clock, which is my target. If any other items that I don't think there are any other items of business. You've got the Audit Committee work programme there, so unless there's any comments on that or items of any other business, I propose to draw this meeting to a close, and to thank everyone for sticking with it for 2.5 hours. I really appreciate the attention, but I think we have covered a lot of important ground, and we are facing some real pressures and difficulties, so I don't apologise for that, but to thank you for sticking with it. So I declare the meeting closed.
Thanks very much, and very good to meet those of you who haven't yet seen.
Yeah, thank you. Good to meet you too.
Yeah, good to meet you. Congratulations, and to meet Steve. Thank you. Bye.